pressed the first key, he knew there was no going back. His father wasn't just a mob boss. He was the man who raised him, who taught him the rules of a world most people only read about, who held a gun to his head to teach him what obedience looked like. And in the world of the Chicago outfit, betrayal isn't forgiven. It's erased. This is the story of how a son became his father's worst nightmare, and how that decision brought the most powerful criminal organization in Chicago's history to its knees. Ask yourself one question before we go further. If the man sitting across the dinner table from you, the man who passed you the salt, who told you stories, who you called your father, had also ordered 18 murders, how long would it take you to act? For Frank Calabrese Jr., it took 37 years and a typewriter. The Chicago outfit, not a street gang, not a crew of opportunists running a corner, an institution with hierarchy, protocol, and a code of silence so embedded in its culture it had a name, Omerta. Within that institution, Frank Calabrese Sr. runs the Chinatown Crew, also known as the 26th Street Crew, the Chicago outfit's primary enforcement arm. Its professional hit squad. He doesn't run it with chaos. He runs it like a foreman runs a factory. The primary revenue stream is what the street calls juice loans, loan sharking. Calabrese Sr. targets cash-strapped borrowers and gamblers, people excluded from traditional banking, people already desperate enough to say yes to anything. The interest rates, 1% to 10% per week. Run the math. That's annual simple interest between 52 and 520%. Miss a payment? The unpaid interest folds back into the principal. The debt doesn't grow, it devours. Default entirely? The crew seizes your assets, your car, your home, your business. Calabrese Sr. personally takes a commercial auto repair shop from a man named Matthew Russo after Russo falls behind on his juice loan payments. The economic machine is elegant in its cruelty, but cruelty to operate at scale requires enforcement. The same table where his father ate dinner was the same table where he ran the business. For Frank Jr., growing up inside this world wasn't a revelation. It was just Tuesday. You learned the rules. You followed the rules. You survived until you couldn't anymore. Because here's the thing about the enforcement arm of the Chicago outfit. Between 1970 and 1986, Operation Family Secrets will eventually investigate 18 murders and 1 attempted murder, all committed to protect the outfit's illegal operations. 18 people. That last one, September 14, 1986. Hold on to that name. It will matter more than all the others. July 28, 1995. Federal indictment. Frank Calabrese Sr. and Frank Calabrese Jr. are charged together. Racketeering, juice loans, both sentenced. Both sent to the Milan Federal Correctional Facility in Michigan. Frank Sr. 118 months. Frank Jr. 57 months. Same building, same walls. Very different calculations about what comes next. From inside federal prison, Frank Sr. doesn't stop. He continues reaching out through every channel available. Associates on the outside, retired police officers on his payroll, family members he can leverage. Control is his oxygen. He cannot exist without it. And his son watches all of it. Frank Jr. describes the dynamic, not in the language of crime, but in the language of psychology, a toxic cycle of manipulation, volatile abuse, and deep-seated fear. He describes his family as codependents, constantly hoping his father would change, facing another outburst instead. Another reminder of who held the power and who would always hold it. Frank Sr. once held a gun to his son's head to enforce obedience. His exact words, according to testimony:
"I'd rather have you dead than disobey me."
In that Milan facility, alone with the reality of who his father is and what his father will always be, Frank Jr. arrives at an arithmetic that is simple and terrifying. As long as his father remains free or gains power from behind bars, Frank Jr. will never leave this world alive. He says it himself, later. It came to the point where I realized he is never going to let me out of this, and he's never going to lose control of me. Either I'm going to wind up dead, or he's going to wind up dead. July 27, 1998. He goes to the prison library. He types a letter to the FBI's Organized Crime Division. This is no game. I feel I have to help you keep this sick man locked up forever. No immunity request. No money. No formal deal of any kind. Just a son making the only move he believes will keep him alive. After secret meetings with FBI agents, including Special Agent Michael Maseth, Frank Jr. agrees to wear a wire. The FBI builds the recording device into a pair of headphones. Frank Jr. wears them around his neck. He is also wired under a sweatshirt. Think about what that requires. You approach a man who has put a gun to your head, who has told you he would rather see you dead than disobedient. You approach him with a recording device against your skin that will end his life if discovered. And your only job is to seem normal, to walk, to talk, to listen, and to let him keep talking. Most of the incriminating conversations happen exactly here. Walking laps around the prison yard side by side to avoid being overheard by other inmates or guards. The FBI also establishes an undercover surveillance system in the prison's visiting area. Agents sometimes wait up to 5 hours for Frank Jr. to return from a session with no live audio feed, no way to intervene, no safety net. What Frank Sr. says on those recordings is, by any measure, extraordinary. He doesn't confess, he boasts. In long, detailed conversations with his son, he recounts cold cases, unsolved murders, decades of hits the FBI couldn't pin on anyone. He details the 1980 murders of William and Charlotte Dauber, a rural road assassination. He admits to the 1981 car bombing of trucking businessman Michael Cagnoni in DuPage County. He talks about the 1986 murders of Anthony and Michael Spilotro. He describes what people close to him call the Calabrese necktie, his approach to ensuring a target was dead. Strangulation, followed by an ear-to-ear throat cut. He discusses it the way a craftsman discusses technique, and Frank Jr. walks beside him, lap after lap, saying just enough to keep him talking. He refuses everything the FBI typically offers informants. No immunity, no sentence reduction, no payment. When asked later why, his answer is simple and devastating. I needed to keep him in there because I knew I wasn't going to be a bad guy when I got out. So I needed to work out a business agreement with the FBI. A business agreement. From a man raised in a business that ran on blood. September 14, 1986, the murder of John Fecarata. The hit squad arrives. Among them, Nick Calabrese, Frank Sr.'s brother, a soldier in the Chinatown crew. During the struggle with Fecarata inside a vehicle, Nick is shot in the arm. Accidentally, his own weapon. His blood soaks through his gloves. Because it's an unseasonably warm night, Nick pulls the blood-soaked gloves off and puts them in his pocket. He runs. One glove falls out. He doesn't go back for it. FBI agents confront Nick in prison. They show him what they have. They make clear the evidence puts him dead to rights for capital murder. And then here's the psychological pressure that cracks the case open entirely. Nick realizes something. The reason the FBI found that glove, the reason they knew where to look. The reason they could connect him to the Fecarata scene was because his brother Frank Sr. had described the murder on tape to his own son. The choice Nick faces, the death penalty or cooperation. Nick Calabrese becomes the first made member of the Chicago outfit in history to break omerta and testify against his peers. Prosecutor Marcus Funk would later describe Nick's decision as the string that made the entire case fall apart. One glove, left on a warm September night, recovered a decade later, and the entire architecture of the Chicago outfit begins to come apart. A 43-page indictment is unsealed. The entire Chicago outfit named as a single criminal enterprise. 14 defendants charged with 18 murders. A racketeering conspiracy alleged to span 4 decades, from the mid-1960s to 2005. They have 125 witnesses, decades of cold case forensic data, Nick Calabrese's testimony, and Frank Jr.'s tapes. Look at the defendants, and you understand how deep the rot goes. Joseph the Clown Lombardo, capo of the Grand Avenue crew, senior figure in the outfit's hierarchy, indicted specifically for the 1974 murder of Daniel Seifert, a witness scheduled to testify against him in a pension fund fraud case. The outfit didn't wait for the court to speak. It issued its own verdict. Anthony Twan Doyle, a retired Chicago Police Department officer, not a mobster by title, a mob associate by function. His role, monitoring law enforcement investigations using his CPD credentials, specifically tracking the John Fecarata inquiry, feeding that intelligence directly to Frank Calabrese Sr. while he sat in federal prison. Michael Ricci, also a retired CPD officer, former employee of the Cook County Sheriff's Department. His role, messenger and enforcer for Frank Sr. during incarceration, passing instructions, identifying who might be cooperating with federal authorities, assisting in the collection of extortion money. And now, 2007, the trial. The moment Frank Jr. has been building toward since he sat down at that typewriter 9 years earlier. He walks into a federal courtroom, takes the stand, and testifies against his father, face to face. Frank Sr. stares at him, not just watching, staring. Frank Jr. has described his father's gaze in previous interviews as carrying a quality that terrified him from childhood. A glassy, 1,000-yard look. The look of a man who has lost control of himself, who is capable of anything. That look is now directed at a son sitting in a federal witness box. During closing arguments, Frank Sr. turns toward Assistant U.S. Attorney T. Marcus Funk. A juror watches what happens next. Frank Sr. quietly mouths the words, "You're a f***ing dead man," a death threat in a federal courtroom. During his own murder trial, Frank Calabrese Sr. has spent his entire life believing that power and violence are interchangeable. In that courtroom, for the first time, they are finally not. January 28, 2009. Frank Calabrese Sr. stands before U.S. District Judge James Zagel. He is 71 years old. Judge Zagel concludes the prosecution has proven Frank Sr.'s involvement in 13 slayings. He sentences Frank Calabrese Sr. to life in federal prison. And in announcing the sentence, Zagel describes the acts Frank Sr. committed as unspeakable. Not heinous, not monstrous, unspeakable. As if the English language, which has a word for everything, does not have adequate ones for what this man did. March 26, 2009. Nick Calabrese is sentenced for his role in 14 murders. He receives 12 years and 4 months, a significant reduction in direct recognition of his cooperation. He stands before Judge Zagel and says, "I can't go back and undo what I done. I stand before you a different man, a changed man." The judge acknowledges it, but he does not let the weight of what happened dissolve. He tells Nick directly, "I think what you did does make amends by allowing penalties to be paid for the murders of others and for allowing families to know how and why their loved ones died." And then Judge Zagel adds one final sentence to the first made member of the Chicago outfit in history to break omerta. "The organization whose existence you testified to will not forgive or relent in their pursuit of you." Frank Jr. asked for nothing a traditional informant asks for. No immunity, no payouts, no formal witness protection program. When asked later what he actually received for dismantling his father's empire, for 7 years of recorded prison conversations, for testifying face-to-face, he gives an answer that doesn't sound like the end of a crime story. It sounds like the beginning of something else entirely. "Oh, what I got is a chance to live my life free and clear of my dad, so I did get something, and a lot of people around me also got to live their lives free of him too." The 2005 Operation Family Secrets indictment delivered the most significant structural blow to the Chicago outfit in its history. Not just because of the convictions, though 14 defendants and multiple life sentences is historic by any measure, but because of what the RICO Act, applied at full force, demonstrated. You don't prosecute a criminal enterprise by removing one person at a time. You prosecute the enterprise. You name the system, you charge the system, you dismantle the system. The trial changed the Chicago outfit forever. But there are still men operating in the shadows, men who believe their position makes them untouchable, who believe loyalty flows upward and violence flows downward, and the code holds everything together. It didn't hold here. If you want to know which organization is next on our radar, which empire is already cracking from the inside, hit subscribe, turn on notifications. The syndicate is always watching. We'll see you in the next case.